It's a Wednesday morning in the Rev Frank Ritchie joins us in studio. We'll fade the music out quick. We do enjoy playing it.
Oh, when it comes to the second time round, it takes a bit of gloss off the first
It does.
time.
Well, and because you guys have used so much energy when you've hit it the first time, you're just
I'm
a bit
exhausted.
depleted.
I'm
the
still
second time.
recovering, trying to get my heart rate down from the first time.
Welcome in, Frank. Welcome in.
Thank you.
What's part two all about?
Well, you guys put it on the table.
No, yeah.
Yeah, so I sent this to you yesterday because I saw an article that was talking about the Pope recently. His health is not doing too well. I think he's got some sort of respiratory thing that's ongoing. He's in hospital, and they say, it's going to be more ongoing than they thought, and it could be quite severe. And I don't know what's going to happen for him, but I know if a Pope passes away, it's a really big deal, right? All around the world's media will turn up. And there's a movie out at the moment called Conclave. I don't know the most about Catholic stuff, but, I know all the cardinals come together, go into the building, and there's the smoke that comes out the chimney. All that says it's quite theatrical. It's quite interesting to me. But I didn't grow up Catholic, so I'm Christian, but I didn't grow up in the Catholic Church. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts on, does the Pope have relevance to non-Catholics? Like, he's the head of the Catholic Church, which is huge around the world, obviously. And, the central to a lot of people's faith, the Pope. But for maybe more evangelical churches or Pentecostal or whatever that aren't a Catholic church, does the Pope have any connection or relevance to Christians outside of Catholicism?
It's really interesting because the answer to that is probably going to depend on who you're talking to.
Yeah, I would imagine.
There are streams of the Protestant side of the faith, which includes evangelicals, it includes Anglicans, it includes, there's a broad array. You've got people who are still very anti-Catholic, who would and therefore anti-Pope. Some who would probably regard the Pope as the Antichrist. And then you've got people like myself who have huge Catholic sympathies. I head along to
Catholic sympathies?
Yeah, and that
I like the phrase.
And that I'm a Protestant minister, but I'm not protesting against anything. Like, I go to Catholic Mass. I don't take communion at a Catholic Mass just to be respectful of their rules, but I go to Catholic Mass fairly regularly just to experience something that is very different from my own. Like, I go to the cathedral and I can sit down the back of the cathedral during Mass, and it's one of the few Christian spaces where nobody actually knows who I am. So I can walk in, I can participate in the liturgy, I can say hello to other people, and I can leave. And it was me, God, and the community that was present. There's no pressure on me to do anything else. So I really appreciate that. When I think about the popes that have been around since I was a boy, it's been Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, and now Pope Francis I. And I regard all three of those popes very, very highly. Particularly, I was a fan of Pope Benedict XVI because I think he was an amazing theologian. He wrote this series, Jesus of Nazareth, that I think expounded on the life of Jesus in a way that I haven't read anybody else do. It's a phenomenal series and well worth reading. It's worth thinking about. So let's just say that there's an extreme end that views the Pope as the Antichrist. I'm not going to change anybody's mind who's down that end. It's just not possible. But for the rest of us, the Pope is seen in Roman Catholicism as the great unifier of the church. He's the symbol of unity. He's the one who brings everything together. And he's seen to a degree as the most direct representation of Christ on earth. He's the pastor of the church. He's the successor of Peter. And Peter was put in place as like the shepherd of the church after Jesus ascended. And then the Pope, the successor of Peter, is then seen as that for the church. All that aside, whatever your theology of the Pope, therefore, is the shepherd, the pastor, the representative of the largest, by a long shot, Christian body on the planet. So we're talking well over 1 billion people would call themselves Catholic, which is why the Pope is such a big deal. So when the Pope speaks, the rest of the world, no matter what we might think about Roman Catholicism or what anybody else might think, the rest of the world hears what the Pope says and sees that as Christian. So whatever the Pope says, that's what Christianity to a degree thinks. So whatever the Pope says then is relevant for all of us, and we should listen really carefully. What is the Pope saying? Because a lot of the world hears that as Christian.
The voice of Christianity.
Yeah. So what the Pope says then is really important. So I take great notice of what the Pope says. I have my questions around authority. Where does authority sit? So I still have questions around whether the Pope is the ultimate decider for whatever the Church might disagree on. But whatever the Pope says is important. So I think all Christians need to listen to what the Pope says.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've mentioned it before. I grew up Catholic, so I've got the connection. I don't know about the sympathy towards Catholicism because I don't go back to my mum and dad's church, but I've got an emotional bias when it comes to the Pope because I also grew up with the Pope as well. But he's also engaged in interfaith dialogue around the world. So I feel like there's an opportunity for all of us as Christians to be able to say, well, at least he's bringing some unity together, as he's just spoken about. But what about the social and the cultural relevance as well? Like he's actually talked about poverty. He's talked about global climate change. Isn't that a good thing as well?
Oh, yeah. A Catholic social teaching is phenomenal. And I think for those of us, too, who sit in the Protestant stream, we also need to recognise that down through history, when we think about orthodoxy, there came a point at the time of the Reformation where there was some stuff going on that many of us would disagree with. But if we think about arguments like the divinity of Jesus, the dignity of humanity, all of those things that we would consider orthodox, central to the Christian faith. If you look down through history, when all the heresies kind of came up or different ideas were proposed, it was Rome that stood against them. Essentially, it was the Pope that stood against them. So the things that we take for granted in our belief, which weren't always taken for granted, a lot of them exist because Rome was the one that stood for them. But on social teaching and what it means to be human, I think Catholic teaching, I mean, we're talking about 2,000 years of history here and thinking. I think Catholic teaching is held in very high regard. And this Pope in particular, because he comes out of Latin America and Argentinian theology, holds that stuff really, really closely. So speaks about it a lot because his ministry as a priest was very much to the poor.
He did say the other day, too, that he reckons sermons should be limited to 8 minutes worldwide, and we are 20 seconds away from hitting that spot. So we'll wrap it up there. Thanks, Frank. Nice to see you again, and we'll catch you next week.
Thank you.